In today's lesson, you will learn how to put together an artist postcard, or some people may know it as an artist trading card. But basically, it is using the format of a normal postcard, creating a drawing, a portrait on the front, and then layering it over found vintage images. I also stencil into the postcard just to add a little bit of interest and focus. And finally, I work with a little bit of chalk paint and again try to create focus on the face that I've done on the postcard. You don't necessarily have to imitate this lesson, but you're more than welcome to paint along with me. But I'd like to challenge you to take the techniques and do your own response or interpretation, either visually or conceptually, to the card that I am now sending to you. I hope you enjoy today's lesson. In 2012, I started collaborating with another artist, and we decided to plan for an exhibition that we were going to have in 2014. And one of the ways that we maintained contact with one another was to produce postcards. So what we would do is we would make a postcard, and then we would deliver the postcard by hand to one another, either meeting at a restaurant or at each other's homes. This series started with this particular card. This was a card from Lara, and what she did is she photographed herself and her husband. She photographed their shadows as they were looking into a wooded area. And then she's overlaid it with this transparency that's also just, it's an area of the woods. I then made this card, which was in response to this particular card. So in my response, I say to her, "Dear Lara, my forest is my classroom and my garden the closest visual equivalent to your postcard I could find." And what I did is I found this old reproduction of Jackson Pollock's abstract painting, and I saw it as a visual equivalent of Lara's piece because it's got all these colors and these marks that go through it. But I actually responded in quite a conceptual way because the rose is obviously from my garden and it's not from a forest. And then I found these little bits of washi tape that had roses printed on them, and they become not only a conceptual response to this piece, but a visual response because it's on the green washi tape. I then stitched with my sewing machine over this drawing, and the stitching becomes an equivalent, a visual equivalent to the little plants or the branches that are in Lara's piece. She then responded to this piece by making this card, and she wrote on the front, "Roses aren't always red." And on the back she says, "Dear Joan, wherever we are, classroom, boardroom, home, wherever our forests are, life must be lived with courage. Love, Lara." I then looked at that, and then I found this artist whose name is Michael Rose, and I did a portrait of him, and I said, "Dear Lara, in this case the rose is red. Michael Rose on Sketchy is a redhead. His website is called mademistakes.com, so no doubt he has had his share of battles." So again, this relates more conceptually than visually to this piece. Lara then creates a portrait, which I think is largely a visual response to this because it's a portrait. On the back, she writes, "Viola audata is used as a source for a scent in the perfume industry. Violet is known to have a flirty scent to its fragrance, and it comes and goes. Just like our birthdays, they come and go. Wishing you a very happy birthday today, Joan." So she sends our conversation in a completely different direction again. And what I do is I produce this card, and this card was or this drawing, this portrait is drawn on a gift bag that someone gave to me for my birthday. So on the back I say, yesterday my birthday was about time passing, but it also means moving on to new challenges. This postcard exchange not only marks time, but is a celebration of how we challenge one another. Love, Joan. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a postcard for you. I'm going to start a conversation with you. And what I normally do is I use old postcards as the basis. You can just use normal card and cut it out to the size. And I think this size is probably 15 by 10, if I'm right. So I always try and make my postcards actual postcard size. So what I normally do is I work drawings on transparent paper. This transparent paper is called Mylar. It's architect's drafting film, but you might find it difficult to get hold of this. I love this because it can take ink, it can take all sorts of materials, even oil paint. It really is the most incredible stuff. And then it layers quite beautifully. So Mylar is wonderful. But if you don't have Mylar, then normal tracing paper is fine. So today I'm going to work on a piece of tracing paper just because I think most people will probably be able to access this. What I normally do when starting to make a postcard is that instead of actually cutting and measuring, I just normally just trace around the postcard that I intend gluing over. And I'm going to start drawing in this little square. And the muse today is called Eden Bartholomew. You could either draw in pencil. I'm going to go straight into using my Faber-Castell pens. So I love these artist pens because they've got a lovely range in value. But if you don't have pens like this, you could always use Copic markers, very light ones. I'm going to very loosely draw Eden's face. So I'm just going to indicate where the face is going in. I think I want it fairly big. And the eyes are going to go in here somewhere. And I'm going to start drawing in her nose. I've recently been doing a lot of portraits, and I found that if I get the nose right, I can normally fit the rest of the features to the nose. So the nose almost determines everything else in the artwork. Eden's got a bit of a bump on her nose, a very noble nose, almost looks Roman. So I'm drawing in the eye. And what's nice about this lovely light color in this pen, if I make a mistake, I can just draw over it. And you'll see that when I complete the artwork, all these funny little marks should disappear. So this is her Cupid bow. I'm putting in the lips now. And if you had to see my head, I'm constantly looking at my reference. I often say to my students, 60% looking at the reference and 40% looking at what you are actually drawing. And that should give you an accurate art piece, because the art piece is not on the piece of paper, it's what you observe. I think I've made this area between her nose and her lips a little bit too short, but it's not serious. I'm not worried about absolute realism. I'm more about getting the feeling of this person, her attitude. And the second eye should line up with the first one. I think it could be slightly higher. And again, don't get too stressed. This is a quick piece, so don't get too stressed about, in fact, I think the distance could be too great there. Actually, it's okay, I think. About getting a piece perfect, absolutely perfect, because we are just making a little postcard. So and then an indication of her neck. So then the second step is picking up a more bold pen. So this is a black micron. And you could use any fine liner. And this is where so in the second pass I'm looking again and I'm refining what I did the first time. In fact, I think I might pick up another one of these pens and just look again with this. And I really love these pens because they do establish all the values for you. You don't really have to think too much about pressing harder, making more marks, because these pens do it all for you. Okay, so just looking again at Eden's face and observing where everything goes. That eye's a little bit smaller than what I've drawn it. Second pass, putting a little bit more detail in. She's got a lovely large space here on her eyes, and I think I could have initially put that eyebrow in a little bit too low. She's sort of got this arched eyebrow that helps with her expression. And I think now is the time to pick up that black pen. So I'm going to pick up the black pen, and so this would be the third pass on this drawing, just adding more detail in. And I don't really want to fill too much in because I want to retain some of the transparency of this piece of paper. I'm really just working with line in this piece more than shading. I'm very carefully observing the contour lines of her face. I love working with a broken line. You don't have to commit yourself too much when working with a broken line. It's a lot more forgiving than a definite solid line, and most people will not realize that the line is broken. When you're more confident with your mark making, you can draw a solid line, but I quite like this broken suggestive line rather than something that's overstated. I'm just indicating her tear duct, establishing that eyelid, and moving up to that eyebrow. She's got quite thick, wonderfully defined eyebrows, so you need to establish that by using quite a lot of line. Just establishing the hairline. And I think I need to work a little bit more dark tones into the side of her face to establish that shadowy area. I'm going to pick up a thicker black pen to colour in the pupil of her eyes. I'm then going to colour in her iris a little bit darker and work some shading into the side of her face to capture that shadowy area. I'm going to add a little bit of shading on her forehead on the right hand side, a little bit more to her eye, and then I'm going to pick up a jelly roll, a white jelly roll, to start adding in highlights. Highlights on the eyes, around the eyelids, under the eye, anywhere where there's a shine. So there's a shine on the top of the eyelid, under the eyebrow, a little bit around the nose, on that nostril, underneath the nostril, a little spot on her nose, on the little piece above her lips, and then I'm going to try and pick up that white outline around her lips and also some reflections on her bottom lip. Just little touches on the chin, under the eye on the right hand side, and inside that pupil, again on that lid. In the reference, it's difficult to see on the inside of her eye, so I think to make this artwork a little bit closer to that reference, I'm going to darken that whole area on the inside of her eye, above her eye, and down into that cheek, just using some hatched marks. At this stage, I have decided I've actually done enough drawing. And what I'm going to do, or what I normally do, is I go through my collection of vintage postcards and I start seeing how they will react or work with the drawing that I've done. This floral one works quite well. I'm trying out these vintage drawings of buildings, and they also work quite well with that piece. Sliding another one underneath, and it works. But I've decided to work with vintage flowers. So these vintage flowers have been taken from a collection of magazines that I have, and I collect a lot of these vintage papers. So I've put it underneath and it actually works quite well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that original flower postcard as a support for this vintage paper. The vintage paper is very thin. But before I carry on, I've decided to do a little bit of stenciling. I've got this whole collection of stencils that I've spent years collecting, and I particularly like this one with the little dots. I also love using the one that's got the bigger dots. And yesterday what I did is I bought this new stencil that's got all these funny little symbols on it, little arrows and little triangles. And it's got this dotted line at the top that I particularly love. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down this dotted line and start working it into areas of that face. So I pick up the grey artist pen and start stenciling this dotted line down the side of the face. And then, yeah, that looks quite interesting. And then I'm going to try it above the forehead, just above the eyebrow line. And the problem is, when I start working with stencils, I just want to stencil everywhere. So I've got to hold myself back with all this stenciling. Yeah, and that actually looks quite nice. I'm going to just pick up my floral background and see how it works, and I think it's quite successful. So I've just zoomed in a little bit more so you can see what I'm doing. And what I like to do is I like to hide the date in my work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the stencil and I'm going to write 2021. I think I'm going to do it in this. So I think I'm going to put a 2, and I often don't really plan where I'm going to put the numbers. It's just all quite instinctive. So I've put a 2 there, and I think I'm going to put a 0 maybe over here. Oops. And I'm going to shift to a smaller stencil and maybe pick up a black pen and put maybe a 2 over here, just a narrow eyebrow. And just to be cheeky, I think I'm going to put a 1 over her eye. So she's looking at 2021. That's quite interesting. Now I almost feel I need to outline these, but I'm going to slide this in and just have a look at what it looks like. It looks quite, yeah, those could go with some outlines. So I think I'm going to go and outline those. I'll just outline them in black. Yeah, that looks quite good. And the 2. 2021, we've got that. I'm not actually, I think what I do want to do is I want to do some more stenciling. So I think I'm going to put some arrows in just to emphasize this 2021. So I've got these wonderful little arrows. So I think I'm going to do that. Then we'll have a little curved arrow coming in here. And possibly it might be fun to have one in the middle of her nose. put an arrow in here. And I think that's enough. So I'm going to pick up the black again, and I'm just going to do a little bit of outlining. My cat's just walked into the room, so I hope that he's not going to do anything too evil and disturb us. Okay, just outlining that last arrow. And I'm just going to check what that looks like again. Sort of thinking those arrows should... I'm going to leave the arrows for now, I think. So what I want to do is I think I want to have this flower almost overlapping her face. So I'm going to outline this little bit at the bottom, and I think I'm going to cut it out. So I'm going to use this pen just to give myself an indication of where that flower is. And I'm going to cut that part of her face out. So I think what I'm going to do is cut the whole edge out and cut into there, and then we'll have another look at it. So I'm just going to quickly... You could do this with a knife. I couldn't locate my knife, so I'm just going to do it in a pair of scissors, and hopefully I'm going to be careful enough. Cut along here. And I'm hoping you're seeing what I'm doing. Very hard to cut and hold something in front of the camera, but I'm sure I'll manage. Okay. Yeah, that fits quite successfully over there. So I'm going to cut the edge out. And now I'm going to glue this over the background. So if you are working with tracing paper, you can't put any wet glue on it because it will wrinkle. So you need to use something like this. This is a sprayable adhesive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that over. I'm going to spray it very lightly, and then I'm going to adhere it to the surface. I'm going to do the same with this. Actually, I just looked around. That's also quite interesting. That's also lovely that, although a bit strange that I've cut that shape out. But yeah, that's something to remember. Look at the back of what you are doing. So I'm going to go back to this original card, and I'm going to glue this to the card, and I'm going to glue that over using the sprayable adhesive. I do like it that her features almost disappear, and that you've got to really look for the figure. But if you wanted to, you could re-establish her nose. So you could draw it over this. Oops, okay. I thought that was too strong. And you could take your black pen and you could draw her nose over that again. But what I'm going to do is I find this whole thing quite busy. So I'm going to take some chalk deco paint and I'm just going to smear it over sections of the card just to provide some resting places for the eye. And then I think the card's going to be complete. I love the texture of this. So you'll see, it's almost like it's got a paste to it. If you are using normal acrylics, you could possibly just put baby powder into it or corn flour, and it will stiffen up that paint. It's a little bit dark, so I'm going to add some white acrylic to it and just give it a bit of a mix. And I quite like that pale colour. And I've got this toy credit card that I use to spread, but you could use just a normal credit card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up some of this paint and I'm just going to spread it over parts of this artwork. Just to highlight that face. And create a little bit of focus. And I might just put in a stroke here. Or it looks like that paper's wrinkling, but I'm not going to let it worry me too much. So I'll put a little bit of a stroke here. Hopefully it will dry flat. In a lot of my work I use credit cards and I make little marks like this on my pieces. So if you are familiar with my work, this is what I do. And it almost becomes like a little trademark. And I think this piece is done. I'm going to let it dry and then photograph it again, and hopefully those wrinkles will disappear. The wrinkles didn't disappear on my card, but I've decided that I don't mind them that much. They've dried fairly flat, so I'm going to leave the card as is. Sometimes what I do is I do stitch over the card with my sewing machine, but I'm not going to do that today.